Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where in the world you're logging in from. This is Scott Woodbury-Stewart. I'm the founder and CEO of Target Test Prep. I'm logging in from Miami this morning. We have Jeff Miller, head of GMAT instruction at Target Test Prep, logging in from New York City. And Marty Murray, head of curriculum development, also logging in from Florida today. And, now's about the time where many GMAT folks start studying to take the test in July, August, September. A lot of people get a head start. And so today we're going to kind of kick things off for the new year, with common GMAT myths debunked, right? And there's no shortage of GMAT myths out there. We won't cover all of them today, but we're going to try and cover about 10. And it's going to be a super impactful little webinar for you folks, because if you bought into these 10 myths, well, these 10 myths would really hold you back. And we hate to see that. At Target Test Prep, we're in the business of helping students let their light shine and succeed. And, we help people crush the GMAT and the GRE and a bunch of other standardized tests. So, knowing that these things are myths and knowing the truths of the matter is going to be a great help for all of you folks. And if you have any questions along the way, drop them in the comments. This will be an informal discussion. Jeff and Marty will be jumping in, and you folks are more than welcome to add your comments and your questions, and we'd be delighted to help you. So let's get started. So the first myth we're going to talk about is the myth that you can get faster on the GMAT by rushing. So in other words, you can get faster at solving GMAT questions by rushing. So, if you said, hey, Scott, in 15 years of teaching the GMAT, what are some of the top mistakes people make when they're preparing for the GMAT that really hold them back? Well, the first thing is that they rush, right? So why do they rush? Well, they rush because, it's a time test. So they have in their minds, hey, for example, for the quant section, they say, hey, I got to do questions in about 2 minutes, right? And they're very, very well aware of that time pressure. So when they're studying for the test, they rush. They're like, I got to get faster. There's this fascination, this preoccupation, right, with getting faster. And what they do is, instead of getting better, they rush. They're like, okay, the way to get faster is to just go fast. And I'm going to give you a couple sort of examples of other places in the world of why that's crazy, okay? Let's think about playing the piano. This is an example I've used forever because it's near and dear to me, and I think it's going to make sense for a lot of you. Now, imagine if you sat down to play a complicated song on the piano, and from the very first day, you just tried to play at the same pace as the composer or the pianist who played that song regularly. I mean, you'd be screwed, right? Because you'd never, ever, ever build the understanding of how to play that song. You would always be forever horrible. It would sound ridiculous. You couldn't do that. Mozart probably couldn't do that, right? Axl Rose probably couldn't do that for November Rain, right? Even the people who made these songs had to build up, play at the tempo you hear when you listen to Spotify or listen to a concert or something. So what would you do? Well, you literally start off, okay, here's where my fingers go, right? Here's where my feet go, right? And you go slowly and you build your accuracy, getting the notes correct, right? You get a little faster, you get better, you understand, the brain starts to form connections. Where are my fingers supposed to go? Where are my feet supposed to go? When and where? And over time, without actually pushing the speed, you get faster. Why do you get faster? Because you got better. You had a deeper understanding of playing that piano song. Your brain, your body had stronger connections for playing that song. So lo and behold, you're playing the song at the correct tempo. But if you tried to force the speed from the very beginning, you'd be screwed. You'd be forever horrible because you would never take the time to actually get good at playing the song. And speed comes from being good at doing something, not because you force yourself to try and go fast and fall flat in your face, right? The same thing happens when you're studying for the GMAT. If you try and solve questions as fast as you possibly can, you're going to be forever slow because a couple of things are going to happen, right? You're never going to build the skills you need to do better on these questions. You're never going to develop the deep understanding you need. you're never going to develop that feeling of sitting with a question and being uncomfortable and struggling to get better. And as a result of all that, the brain is just never going to conceptualize these questions in a way that you need to become faster at them. So I urge you all, okay, this is tip number one, okay? I urge you all when you're starting your GMAT prep, the best thing you all can do is start off untimed. Start your quant off on time, especially start your verbal off on time. So does it hold you back in quant to rush? Big time. Does it hold you back in verbal to rush? Big time times 10, maybe times 100. So you got to start off your preparation untimed. The question people will have is, wait a minute, well then how do I get faster? When do I get faster? You know, when do I focus more on the time pressure? And the answer is gradually. You will start to get faster organically from getting better at what you're working on. Of course, you have to get yourself in a position where you understand timing on the GMAT and you understand what your pacing should be come test day. And the way you do that, and of course, if you're using Target Test Prep, the course is going to tell you when it's time to speed up, right? It's going to say, okay, now we're going for, our accuracy is really good. We're going to go for a little bit more speed. And the course will prompt you, okay, now it's time to speed up a little bit. Let's see if we can keep the accuracy level as you speed up. And the key is, as soon as you speed up and the accuracy drops substantially, that's your key that you're moving too fast, right? That's your key, you're moving too fast. And what you have to do is you have to slow down, get back to a point where your accuracy comes up, okay? So over time, as you move towards test day, you may be trying to shave off, I don't know, could be like a couple seconds a week. It's nothing dramatic. You're slowly moving towards, on test day, being fast and accurate. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you're fast but not accurate, why go in and take the test, right? You want to go in and get every question wrong really fast? I don't know. It doesn't really make much sense, but it's crazy. We see people trying to do that more often than you think, right? They're like, well, I'm really fast. Well, you got 70% of the questions wrong. So did the speed serve you? So you got to start off on time. So that's my number one tip for you all. You got to start your prep untimed. You got to go slowly at first. You got to master the concepts. By mastering the concepts, by getting better, by getting more skilled, by developing more awareness, seeing the battlefield from a 360-degree sphere, and maybe even from the drone level, from everywhere possible, right? You're going to get to the point where you are, in fact, moving faster. And that's going to make a world of difference for everyone who's watching this video. Jeff, Marty, jump in anytime you want. If you guys have anything addition you want to say any of these points.
I just think that's super important. You know, I get so many people contact us, get halfway through the course, and they're not getting their performance, or they get near the end, and they say, I did the whole course, I learned everything, but my score is not where I want it to be. And then you look at their analytics and they rush through every question the whole time. So don't do this to yourself, you know, like make sure that when you get through all the topics and all the questions, you've really mastered things by doing them, taking your time and really learning them thoroughly. And, you know, you don't want to spend 3 months preparing and then not get your score because you tried to rush. Take your time and really learn what you're doing.
Yeah. And I also think, you know, speed comes from, as we said, knowledge of the material, right? So you can't just say I'm going to be faster because I'm faster. It's about when you see a problem come up on the screen, can you recognize what it's being asked? Then can you execute a game plan on the question? That's where speed really comes from. Not necessarily what you're doing in the moment, but just your ability to know what to do. And look, some questions take longer than others. Some you'll have less of an idea what to do, but you being able to take advantage of the ones that you know what rule is being tested, you know what formula needs to be used, you know what process needs to be followed, is really cool, because then you're doing some questions in 30 seconds and then some might take you 3.5 minutes, and that's totally fine. But you just have to understand that that's the way it's going to go, so you're not trying to rush on the questions that don't need to be rushed on, and vice versa. So this is all about getting the right skill set and doing this the right way. Otherwise, yeah, it's just going to be a fool's errand, because you're not going to have the skills you need. And yeah, you're just going to rush through the test and of course, not get the score that you need.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jeff and Marty. And, if you need a final thought, think of Wyatt Earp, right? The gunslinger in the West, right? He said, fast is fine, but accuracy is final. You got to learn to be fast in a hurry, right? Fast is fine, but accuracy is final, right? If you're in a gunfight and you miss the target, what's the point of being fast, right? Back in the Old West. And, Jeff brought up another myth too that I didn't even have on the radar today, but we might as well talk about it because it's going to help you guys. For example, on quant, the 2-minute time per question is just an average, right? So not all questions will take you 2 minutes. I mean, that's the nature of an average, right? For example, if you're going through the target test prep course, you'll probably get the easy questions done in 30 seconds, 45, 60 seconds, right? You'll crush the easy questions, and that's just great because now you're banking time to do more difficult questions, right? The medium questions after the course, they're going to be fast too. You might be a minute to a minute 45 on, most of the medium questions, right? And you're continuing to bank time. Boom, you hit these hard questions on the test, right? And this is sort of a nature of a different topic about how much time you spend in these real complicated ones. But let's assume you're going to attack them, which we encourage people to do. Yeah, they might take you 2.5 minutes. Some might take you 3 minutes, right? And that's fine, right? As long as you've banked the time by being extra fast on some of the easier medium questions, you can then take that time and further invest it into some of the hard questions. So don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes people say, wait a minute, God, this really hard question took me 3 minutes. Well, that's okay, right? We don't want all the questions taking you 3 minutes. We want to shave the time down over time as much as we can, ladies and gentlemen. But you got to look at it holistically. You got to look at the whole sphere of questions. Look, on verbal, if you're getting sentence corrections, man, they're so mathematical, right? It's crazy. If you're getting the sentence corrections questions done in 30 seconds, well, now you have time to invest in a really hard CR, an inference or something, So it's not, you don't have to be hitting that exact, whatever, minute and 30 per question or 2 minutes per question. It's just an average. And knowing that is going to help you reduce your anxiety over the question time. And it's going to help you better strategize how you do prepare. Gentlemen, anything more on timing?
I think I'm ready to
covered it.
I'm ready to hear your next myth.
Yeah, the next myth, man. The next myth is a big one. This might be one of the granddaddy, the Loch Ness Monster of all myths. And that's the myth that you should overinvest extra time on the first 10 questions of the quant section or the verbal section. Overinvest time, right? So this has been here since, God, as long as I can remember, right? It's one of the things we have to sort of retrain people on all the time. They say, hey, I read that, geez, I should spend 4 minutes a question on the first 10 questions. And then, man, my score is set. We'll just pick the quant section for ease of discussion. And then my score is set, and it doesn't matter what happens during the rest of the time. Or some variation of that, right? There's 14 shades of color right here, 14 shades of gray that I hear regarding this myth. And to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, that's probably the number one way to sabotage your score. Because, and you can read on our blog, we have a pretty interesting article about sort of what's going to happen if you do this. But the summary is you're going to run out of time, right? Imagine you invested 60% of your time on the quant section on the first 10 questions. Great. Well, the strategy would be beautiful if you had unlimited time. Yeah, let's just spend an hour per question and phone a friend, right? Well, of course, you can't do that. I mean, you're gonna get disbanded from taking the GMAT. Don't do that, right? But sure, if you had unlimited time, you could spend as much time on each question as you want. But what's going to happen is you're going to run out of time. And once that algorithm starts seeing you getting questions wrong that expect you to get right, once you got a guess on questions towards the end of the section, both of these things are going to give you a huge penalty against your score. So yeah, let's say you spent most of your time on the first 10 questions. Okay, well, great. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's got you pegged at a Q51 or a Q50. I don't know, but it's got you pegged at some high score. Well, great. Well, now it's going to be really careful to watch you the rest of the test. Are you really a Q51 score? Are you really a Q50 score? And you know what? As you start getting these streaks of questions wrong and you start getting the easy questions wrong and the medium questions wrong because you're rushing, you're running out of time, man, you're going to see that score drop. And it's not just going to drop back to baseline. Very likely it's going to drop way below where you would have scored if you had just worked at a pace that was logical and rational and one that maximized your sort of ability to get each question right. Okay. So for sure, you do not want to overinvest time in the first X, whatever X is in your mind, 5, 10, 15, 20 questions of a section. What you want to do is maximize your progress versus your time across each of the sections. And in doing so, that's going to maximize your score. Do not overinvest time in the first X questions of either section. Marty, Jeff, you guys got any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think even if you still don't believe what we're saying here and you're like, well, person X on GMAT Club said that they did it. I think, you need to always take that advice with a grain of salt, because the person who did overinvest in the first 10 questions probably could have gotten an amazing score by not overinvesting in the first 10 questions. It means they're probably just pretty darn good at the GMAT. Other things that people say are like, well, I tested this on the GMAT practice exam, so it has to be true. Now, this is something no one can tell you for sure, but my guess is GMAT has a similar algorithm on their practice test to the real exams. We know this, or we think this. But I don't think they're going to let anyone sit around and play with their algorithm on a practice test and make it 100% equal to what you're seeing on test day, to the point where someone could, quote unquote, crack the algorithm. So I wouldn't even look at that as proof, because I just don't think that's something they're willing to do. So again, like, you got to just be careful of the advice that you're following, and understand that we've worked with thousands of students, and I've had many conversations, and those conversations of students who have not done well in the test a lot of times come back to, well, I followed this strategy for taking my GMAT, and obviously it didn't work. So just be careful. There's a lot of stuff out there. Stick to the experts, stick to things that have worked for people across the spectrum of GMAT test takers.
I mean, there is something to it, and there's a reason why the myth does keep going. And that's the reason is that the first 10 questions, the first 5 questions are relatively easy. So if you miss all of those, yeah, you drove your score down, right? Because you just missed relatively easy questions. The first question is a medium question. So if you missed the second question, now you're getting into easy. You missed the third, you're getting deep into easy, and you got to dig yourself back out of a hole. But it's not about the first 10 questions. It's about getting easy and medium questions correct. Anytime you miss an easy or medium question, you're driving your score down. So really, the key thing is to think, if I see an easy or medium question, I should get that correct. That's your goal, as opposed to focusing on those first 10 questions.
Yeah, those great points, Jeff and Marty. Really great points. And you know what? This is a little bit academic. Talk about another time. But like playing around the GMAT software, the practice tests, you gotta be careful. Cause and effect bias, cause and effect fallacies, self-selection bias, correlation versus causation, right? So it gets into some of these interesting academic points that's actually tested on critical reasoning, right? The fact that you got all the first 10 questions right, and oh, by the way, you got a Q51, well, that's a real suspect argument to conclude that because you got the first 10 questions right, that's what led you to the Q51. And this is kind of cause and effect stuff we teach in TTP all the time. But, any of you who know what we're talking about in terms of playing around with these tests, it just gives you a little bit more to think about in terms of the validity of that. Okay, so no over-investing time in the first 10 questions. The next myth, the third myth we're going to talk about, is another one that's really self-destructive. And that's the myth that the official practice tests are not accurate representations of the actual GMAT. Now, again, I always gotta sort of kind of tell you, I haven't worked at the GMAC, so I didn't build the official GMAT. I didn't build the official practice test, right? So, but what I can tell you is in 15 years of taking the test, in my opinion, they're extremely good predictors of how you're going to perform on the GMAT, all else equal, right? Let me say that again. The official practice tests from the GMAC are extremely good predictors of how you're going to perform on the GMAT, all else equal. So then why, God, you don't have to look too far, GMAT Club, any place else out there in the universe where people are talking about the GMAT, you see people say, God, my tests on the official practice tests just didn't reflect my performance on the GMAT. That is a real thing. So that's not a myth. That does happen, regularly. But it's not, in my opinion, because the practice tests are not a reflective representation of what's on the real GMAT. It's because of a number of other confounding variables. I won't talk about all of them, but I'm going to talk about the ones I think you need to hear. I want you to imagine a situation. You prepare with materials that were completely built off the official practice test, right?
Yeah.
There was no real creativity that the creators of these materials used. They didn't use their own knowledge of logic, psychometric, standardized tests. They literally just went to, the official practice tests. And they said, okay, let's build our curriculum off of this, right?
Brilliant.
What'd you say, Marty?
I said, brilliant. What a brilliant idea.
Yeah, right. Seems good. Well, you're going to go through this course and you're going to take these 6 official practice tests, and you're probably going to do really, really, really well, right? Because you were trained to think like these specific couple hundred questions that show up on these official practice tests. But remember, how do you do well on the GMAT? You do well on the GMAT by developing your overall critical reasoning, logical analysis, mathematical skills, grammar skills, meaning skills. And you get better at seeing a new question and attacking it because you have the toolkit to attack it, not because you've seen that exact question before. Now, hey, if you see the exact question, God bless you, that's great. I mean, we'll take that. We'll take the freebies anytime we can get them. But we can't depend on seeing the same exact questions on the test.
Or even the same type of, pattern.
Yeah, exactly, Marty. So if you're preparing the materials that are just built basically off of these official practice tests, of course, you're going to do well in the official practice tests. And of course, you're probably going to get to the real GMAT and have a score drop, right?
Yeah.
So what can you do? The question might be, well, how do I know, what materials are or are not based on the official test? Well, you got to be always asking yourself, am I developing global skills, right? So for example, if you're solving exponent questions, if you're just doing the same type of exponent question, that's a big red flag, right? Like for example, at TTP, you probably do target test, but you probably do 200 different exponent questions or more, maybe 250. Because they're a well-varied, very diverse set of questions that touches upon all of the different parts of the thinking skills you need to do well in roots and exponents questions. You will see our stuff is not built on the official practice test. It's built on what we want to teach students to do well on the GMAT. So as a result, sometimes people are like, oh man, got to do 250 exponent questions. But you know what? When they do them, they're like, wow, I'm not getting any roots and exponents questions wrong. And that's the philosophy we have at Target Test Prep. Don't study until you get questions right. Study until you can't get questions wrong. So you got to make sure you're engaged in topical learning. So whatever, if you're studying, doesn't matter. You're studying probability, you got to see all of the different thought processes, thinking patterns, tools you need to do well under the field of probability. Not just a small selection of case studies like, ooh, let's bright line these 5 roots questions or these 5 probability questions. And if you got those, you're good to go on the test. It doesn't work that way. You want to be doing a broad spectrum of questions so that when you get to the test, you have the knowledge, you have the skills to do well. I had another point, but Jeff, Marty, I don't know if you wanted to piggyback on any of that about.
I think you bring up a really good point. Well, I guess I agree with all of your points about that. So, Marty, you go first, and then I have a.
Well, I see it a lot in verbal. I mean, you see people talking constantly about, oh, I learned in this course, I learned from this person, the GMAT always does this. Well, if you're hearing, you really need to be learning general things, not just what the GMAT does, because a lot of the time when someone's telling you what the GMAT does, they're really basing that on the practice test. Well, that's what they saw in the practice test. So they teach you that, and then you say, well, that's what the GMAT does. And then you go to take a practice test. You're like, wow, this is great. It works perfectly. But then when you go to take the real GMAT, the GMAT does something else. So that's one of your red flags, is seeing a lot of talk about what the GMAT does. I mean, certainly it's good to know a few things that the GMAT does, but if your entire learning is based on what the GMAT does, then you're probably learning how to take the official practice test rather than learning how to take the official GMAT itself.
Yeah.
So,
In my, I guess this was my other point, and I think it takes what you're saying in a different direction. And funny enough, I made a video on it this morning. I think people underestimate, and this is across test prep, we see it way too much. They underestimate the magnitude of test day completely. Like, we'll have students who go in and they're like, okay, I didn't get my score, but I was very prepared. I did all of this. I did all the OG. I did everything. I wasn't nervous. And I'm like, well, I think you subconsciously were nervous. I think things were happening on test day that you weren't even aware of at the time. And there's also other people who come out and say I was nervous. But the point is, you can't overlook those things and then come back and be like, well, no, I think those practice tests are inaccurate. I don't think they're an indicator of where I'm at.
Yeah.
I think they are. I just think you're forgetting like how big of a day the GMAT is. I don't care if you're taking it at home and dealing with proctors. I don't care if you're taking it at the test center and dealing with that new environment. These things affect you, whether you realize it in the moment or not. That's usually why things are happening. It's very, very rare for me to talk to a student and come out of it with no key points as to why that score dropped. So the overarching conclusion is, don't look at those practice tests as, that they're not good indicators of where you're at. Don't look at those practice tests to say they're not accurate. I really think they are, but you've got to look at the whole picture when something drops and try not to blame those practice exams.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. And it kind of dovetails with Pooja's question about how do you overcome negative thoughts and maybe stress and anxiety. It's real simple. You be so prepared, you crowd out these negative thoughts, right? Like if you think about it, like this gets into like test anxiety, like where do the negative thoughts come from? Well, imagine something, all of you on the call, I want you to imagine something that you know so well. You could do it blindfolded in your sleep, drinking a cup of coffee in one hand, carrying grocery bags in the other, 8 people talking to you about 8 different things, but you could get this right 100% of the time. Would you be stressed if someone said, hey, you're up, you're going to do this? No, you wouldn't. The stress about the GMAT comes, and the negative thoughts, Pooja, and everyone else listening, comes from the delta, the gap between what you know you're going to have to do and what you know you're able to do. And it's in that battlefield in between that the negative thoughts can come in, that the negativity can come in, that the stress can come in, that the anxiety can come in. But when you shut that gap down, when you are in parity between what you're going to need to do and what you're able to do, you're like, let's get it on. Like, let's rock it. Like, hey, man, like, hey, I just spent, $1,000 on prep, 6 months of my life prepping. I'm gunning for Harvard Business School, bleepity bleep bleep, let's get it on. Like, come on, let's see, show me what you got. And that's an amazing thing. So the way to combat the negative feelings is to be so prepared going into the test that you don't care. You really don't care what questions you see, right? Doesn't matter. You have complete confidence, complete conviction in your capabilities and your skills and your knowledge. It doesn't matter, right? You're so prepared. But when you're less than prepared, and at least in my opinion, your level of negativity, your level of anxiety, your level of stress is at least in direct proportion to your lack of, inverse proportion to your lack of understanding, right?
Yeah.
Do inverse direct.
Something like that.
Something like that, right? Right. The more you're not prepared, the more your stress is going to be, right? And you don't want that, but it's in your power to cut that gap down and be fully prepared come test day.
Well, this comes into a couple more myths too. Another thing that makes people, like Scott's saying, your gap between your knowledge and your what you have to do. But there's another aspect to that, Scott, and that is that people, and you were talking about people's capability. One of the big myths that really makes people nervous is the myth of the score ceiling.
Oh,
And
totally.
it can even make you nervous. It can make you nervous when you're prepping because you're constantly thinking, well, I might be hitting my score ceiling, you know? So it's making you nervous when you're prepping. And so like what Scott's saying is, well, you can prep and get to the point where you're not nervous anymore. But if you think there might be a score ceiling, well, then you're nervous the whole time because you're thinking, well, I don't know, maybe I'm gonna hit my score ceiling. I can't build a capability. And the other thing this can do is when you're taking the test, you can literally be, you're not thinking it consciously, but some part of you is saying, well, I might be hitting my score ceiling, you know, and maybe I can't get these questions right. So I think a lot of it, you know, for Pooja and everybody else is treat this thing logically and dispense with this myth of the score ceiling, that your capabilities are fixed. Say, look, if I calm myself down during the test, I'm going to score higher. If I'm well prepared, I'm going to score higher, and I can prepare myself more. I mean, everything we learn how to do, whether you know you do a job, you get better and better at with every week, with every month. Anything you do, you get better at it. So treat this that way too. You know, just think your capability is basically unlimited, and you can hit your score goal, and that'll really help reduce your anxiety. Just plain being logical. It's just completely logical that a person can learn and develop and get better at something. And this is the same thing. So that'll make you a lot less nervous if you take that attitude. And I can tell you, I ran into the same thing. I was like, gee, you know, I really didn't even think I could get originally, can I increase my score by 20 points? And I just had to sit there and go, well, if I learn a few more concepts, you know, and I practice a little more, my score should go up. And you can just keep treating every 10 points the same way. If you learn a few more things, you improve your skills, your score is going to go up. You're going to hit your score goal on test day.
That's a great point. Yeah, there's no score ceilings, ladies and gentlemen. You can take this as high as you want. You just have to be willing to work hard and work smart. Don't ever think like you're not a math person, or you're not a sentence correction person, or you're not a CR person. No one's any kind of a person. I mean, you're not a ping pong person until you master ping pong. I mean, you weren't a you weren't a walker until you learned to walk, right? Like you didn't speak English. So you know what I mean, guys? So like the beauty of the human brain is it's amazingly capable. There's nothing nefarious or mysterious about the GMAT. It functions just as anything else that's difficult in the universe. The more you work at something correctly, the better you're going to get. And the sky's the limit, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah, don't ever believe there's a score ceiling. All right, what are we going to talk about next? That's right, the next myth. Okay, this is probably one of the biggest score destroyers. And this is the myth, you know, that you can improve. I'm just picking two numbers here. I just made them up. You can go from 400 to 750 in 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 weeks, right?
Student A.
Yeah, this is probably the number one thing. Like if you didn't listen to anything during this call, during this webinar, and you want to just kind of listen for a second, this will probably be the time to do it. You want to save yourself a lot of stress, a lot of heartache, a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of anxiety, and maximize your score. You got to have a realistic timeline. You got to throw away the stories of the people who went from 400 to 750 in 3 weeks. I said it before. I don't know if I know anybody who's done this. I mean, maybe I could dredge the depths of our databases, our records, and be like, oh yeah, there she is, you know, right? Samantha from Rome, you know, she did the 300 to 750 in 3 weeks. But I don't know anybody, right? And I have a good memory of all these people who have done great things at TTP as students. It's going to set you up for failure. You got to put in the time. What's the time? The time is different for everybody. But you're talking like, look, if you have a wide score gap, I mean, if you're 400 to 750, just I picked those two numbers. I mean, God, listen, you're talking 400 or 500 hours of prep. And if you think you're not, it's not right. It's not right. Now, does that mean there's a few outliers out there and you can cut it down? Sure. And unfortunately, there's a whole industry of people who want you to believe that you can do it in 50 hours or 100 hours or 120 hours. And God bless you. If you can, I shouldn't say you can't, okay? So what I should say is extremely rarely have I ever seen that done. 500 to 750, 400 to 750. TTB students make that score increase all the time, but they do it over 5, 6, 7 months, right? So if you go into it thinking you're going to get a 200, 300, whatever, 400-point score increase in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you're setting yourself up for failure. What's going to happen is you're going to rush, you're going to be pissed, you're going to be stressed, you're going to be upset. You're going to be spending more time reading about what other people did than just doing the work yourself, right? You're going to be burning all your practice tests, right? You're just going to be setting yourself up for failure. So one of the most important things you all can do, and this is going to be uncomfortable, but it works. You should move at the fastest possible study pace you can, all while mastering the material. The best you can do, the fastest you can go, with a caveat that to do those two things, you've got to be mastering the material. And that's going to put you on the fastest trajectory to success. If you try and rush it, things are going to fall apart extremely quickly, ladies and gentlemen. Jeff, Marty, I don't know if you guys got any thoughts on that.
The other thing is, well, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, sure. The other part with rushing, I mean, I noticed a question. Let me find it up here. It kind of goes back a little bit to our last point. That your official mocks were 660, 680, 660, 710, and scored a 600. So I guess this is another component of all this, is that you need to give yourself some built-in time if you need to retake this thing. So rushing takes on many components. Part of it is, am I even able to learn the material in time? And then part of it is, do I have some leeway to redo this thing? Now, the online GMAT has helped with this process, because you can actually take it the day after an in-person exam, for example. But you just want the entire process to be done in a window that works and gives you leeway to retake this thing. Because my guess is that when you scored that 600, any number of things that we've discussed here today could have caused that. And it's quite possible that if you go back in and you're less anxious, because you probably were, because it seems like it was your first exam, you'll probably get somewhere closer to the average of what you were hitting, a higher 160, a higher 600 or lower 700. And that's all part of developing this right timeline, and making sure that you're not trying to jam a square peg in a circle hole over a month or 2 months when you really need, 6 to 8 months. So you gotta be smart from the very start. And man, it's going to be such a nicer process of getting your score goal by doing it that way.
Yeah, it really takes what it takes. And, you have to be prepared for that. I mean, it's a pretty big project. You're kind of like, if you think of quant, you're applying what people learn over a few years of school. And if you have to relearn that or prepare for it, I mean, it makes sense that would take some time. It takes what it takes. Just be ready for that. And don't, people sometimes are, oh, I'm devastated. I've been preparing for a month and my GMAT score isn't anywhere near my goal. What do I do? So it also messes you up psychologically if you're expecting it all to happen right away. So it just takes what it takes. And once again, the theme is be confident that effective preparation will get you to your goal.
Right. And to add to that, Marty, don't take a practice test. Like, okay, take one for a baseline score, right? But don't a month in take one and be like, well, my score isn't improved. It's like, well, have you learned geometry? No. Have you learned ratios? No. Have you learned rates? No. Have you learned work? No. Oh, well, there you have it. That's why it's not these incremental gains. It's a test with a small number of questions, and the pool is huge from verbal and quant. So don't do that to yourself. Don't waste a Saturday taking a test when you could be studying. Don't mess yourself up mentally when it's not worth it. Learn the stuff and then focus on the practice exams, and use a course that, provides time training, obviously the way that TTP does. Then you get your time practice in, you get used to looking at a clock, all that stuff, as opposed to wasting those practice exams.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. Great points, Marty and Jeff. And Priyanka asked something based on the past point, which I think is great. So she's asking, can you use a similar approach to verbal topics as we talked about, like with the exponent stuff, right? So yeah, you got to do remember I said with exponents, like a target test prep, you have like 250, 300, maybe more exponents questions. God, you pretty much can't get a root and exponent question wrong after you go through this stuff. Same thing with verbal. I'll use target test prep as an example. Imagine this. Imagine if you start off just doing random SC questions. Well, what if you get a modifier in the SC with a subject-verb agreement with a logic meaning issue? Well, then what if the next one is like a verb tense mood combined with some idiom stuff, combined with logic, combined with like some participial phrase issues? Wow, how are you ever going to master any of those? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what are you really learning? If this is the beginning of your prep, like, what have you learned about modifiers, right? What if you didn't see another modifiers question for 10 questions? Like, are you really developing deep mastery of modifiers, of verb tense mood, of meaning logic? No. So here's what Target Test Prep does a little bit differently. For example, and why this is something you all can follow, whatever resource you're using. What we do is we progressively make you master these topics. So for example, when you're going through the modifiers chapter, most of the questions have a heavy modifier spin to them, in addition to stuff you've already learned, right, ladies and gentlemen? So like if there was 5 chapters before modifiers, like subject, verb, agreement, pronouns, right, whatever, that stuff you've already learned is coming into these questions, but they all have a modifier focus. So you're like, wow, you're really developing the skills you need to master modifiers. And at the same time, you're reinforcing subject verb agreement, you're reinforcing pronouns, you're reinforcing sentence structure, compound complex sentence, et cetera, et cetera. And as each chapter progresses, like, you know, let's say verb tense mood is next. Well, it has a verb tense mood focus. You get a couple hundred questions on verb tense mood, but now you have modifiers laid in there. You have subject verb agreement laid in there. You have pronouns laid in there. As you get towards the end of the course, now you have the full-on GMAT-like questions that have everything in there. But if you just started with those questions that just randomly test you on 4 different things, it's going to be super hard to master any of those things. So This is what we're getting back to that Jeff and Marty mentioned about topical learning. You got to master modifiers. The way you're going to do that is to do a course that allows you to master modifiers, not just throwing everything at you at random times plus the kitchen sink, right? Same thing with CR. You know what? If you do a week in the argument and then you do a strength and then you do an inference and then you do whatever, I mean, are you really developing deep skills in each of these? No, you're kind of just doing a broad sampling of all of these questions as a whole, but are you really getting tremendously skilled at weaken the argument? There's a lot of ways to weaken the argument, ladies and gentlemen, right? So if you're just doing like 5 or 10 questions here and there, or 20 questions even, you're not seeing the full spectrum of ways that the GMAT tests you on how to weaken an argument, right? But like at TTP, you come out of this weaken the argument chapter, man, it's going to be hard to get a weaken the argument question wrong, because we literally show you pretty much all of the ways that you could be expected to weaken an argument, right? So yeah, it doesn't matter if you're dealing with quant or you're dealing with verbal, this topical sort of topic by topic approach is the way you got to proceed. Yeah. All right, cool. Let's see. Looks like we're on myth number 5. Yeah, one of my favorites. So this is about the intended meaning in sentence correction. This is a big one. I'm sure it's never going to go away, no matter how many times we say it. I'm sure it's going to be here. So lucky you guys all are going to come away with the truth. So the idea of intended meaning in sentence correction, what is this nonsense? Well, the idea of intended meaning is that answer choice A is somehow special, right? The original sentence is somehow special, and you have to preserve that meaning, right? So when people come, you know, from the ether and they come to TTP and they're like, wow, I'm keep getting these sentence questions wrong. It's their first week of TTP. And we look at the error logs and they keep, you know, they're saying basically that they got the question wrong because they're looking to preserve the meaning of option A. And they'll say, oh, B changed the meaning, C changed the meaning, D, they all changed the meaning. So what do I do? You don't have to preserve the meaning of option A, right? So in fact, in many instances, if you looked at it carefully, the meaning convey, let's say A is wrong and C is the right answer in a sentence correction, okay? Quite often C says something subtly or not so subtly different from what A says. So you are not expected to preserve the meaning of A to the right answer. The right answer may have the same meaning as A, or it may not have the same meaning of A. You're never going to know what the meaning is the author intended until you find the right answer. Right? You can't query her or him. You don't have the option to say, what did you mean? What was your intended meaning? Like, how would you know that? There's only going to be one sentence correction question that's grammatically, logically correct, right? There's only going to be one. There won't be multiple ones, okay? Only one will be grammatically correct, grammatically accurate, and logically correct. Doesn't say something ridiculous, doesn't say something ambiguous, right? There's only going to be one. And when you find that answer, that's the right meaning. But if you go into sentence correction with the idea that you have to preserve the meaning of answer choice A, the original sentence, the original underlined sentence, I mean, you're just playing the game on rules that don't exist. You're going to set yourself up for a failure. There is no intended meaning, right, on GMAT sentence correction. You find the right answer. It's going to be grammatically correct. It's going to be logically correct. It's going to say something that makes sense. Okay, period. That's it. So I'm not sure where the intended meaning came from, where it originated, where it had a genesis, but it's still here today. But it's something you got to get away from really fast.
Yeah, I kind of know where it came from, Scott. Yeah. I think back, GMAT has improved their sentence correction questions. And back in the day, some of the questions weren't that great. So you kind of had to sort of figure out sometimes what the question writer meant to say to get the question right. And so that evolved to this thing of, well, look at their first version and try to preserve that meaning, which is just, it's a twisted outcome that doesn't really make sense. But I think that may be a lot of where it came from. And that brings up the point of be a little careful with some of the older SC questions. They're not necessarily that great. So you could pick up some things from those that aren't really accurate for what you need to do to get SC questions correct. But anyway, I think it came from sort of a real thing, and then it got turned into this process that doesn't make really any sense at all, And the other thing that brings up is you got to be logical with this stuff. Is it really logical that the first version would always have the right meaning? Because we all know that there can be meaning issues in any version. So it doesn't even make sense, So try to be logical with how you prepare for the test. It's really going to help you.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Marty. It's a great point. Jeff, you want to pick up?
Saying the intended. Hold on. The intended meaning is mentioned in the solutions to SC questions in the official guide. I got two things we could say to that. One is, I guess the main thing is the official guide explanations are not that good. In fact, I was talking with somebody just yesterday who worked for GMAT, writing official guide explanations. He wrote a letter to them. He said, your explanations aren't that great. Maybe you should hire me to fix them. And they did have him go through GMAT Advanced and fix the explanations. But he said they didn't do it for any of the other official guides. So, anything it says in the official guide as far as explanations, take it with a grain of salt, because it's admitted that those explanations aren't that great.
Yeah, and at the same time, I would recommend you guys all do use the official guides, right? I mean, I think that it's great practice. The official practice tests are great. The official guides are great. You just got to sort of, look, and this is nothing against the GMAC. I mean, they're in the business of preserving the integrity of tests. They're in the business of administering the GMAT, making the GMAT accurate, making it meaningful, making it fair, accessible for people, right? They're not really in the business of giving you like the secrets of how to beat the test, right? So at the same time, like, don't expect to get the official guide and have them give you like, the golden sauce to like blow these questions out of the water, right? It's not their intention. They're giving you, for the most part, accurate responses, accurate solutions, but the testing, are you able to come up with your own solutions? And I feel like that's where the test industry can come in and bridge that gap, because like we are in the business of helping you to think at the cutting edge of your abilities, to be logical, be rational, to show you like how we would approach these questions, right? If we had seen them. So yeah, you should absolutely use the official guides, right? The stuff from GMAC is great. You just got to be sure that, the way you're learning the solutions is in a way that sort of is going to work for you.
It's about judgment calls too, you know. I mean, someone could use the words intended meaning in an official guide explanation in a way that kind of makes sense, but you can't run with that and say that therefore this whole idea of the intended meaning is correct. And the GMAT in general is so much about making judgment calls, especially in the verbal side. You're making judgment calls. What's the best sentence? What's the best critical reasoning answer? So, you know, they're even reading the explanations and how you use them and what kind of ideas you use. Make judgment calls. You know, well, does this really make sense? Is this really going to work for me? Don't just take everything at face value.
Yeah, that's true, guys. And Pooja asked or heard that students, universities are not accepting the home GMAT online one. Is that true? I haven't heard that. I mean, I haven't heard that from anybody. It doesn't mean it's not true, but I haven't heard that. So if anybody else, you know,
there's one school that is not, I know of, that's not accepting the online GRE, but I haven't heard it for the GMAT yet.
Yeah. I'm actually looking at that now. I'm curious, but to date, so far as of Friday, January 6th, I haven't heard anybody tell me that. Doesn't mean it's not happening. Just to my knowledge, it's not something that's come on my radar, Pooja. Which is preferable, online or offline GMAT, Mr. Money Trail? It's up to you. I mean, that's a great question. It's a personal decision. I mean, there's pluses and minuses. Like what are some of the pluses of the online GMAT? Well, it's at home. I mean, if I was taking the test tomorrow, I'd probably rather take it at home. Like, I don't like the process of getting up, getting dressed, brushing your hair, driving to the test center, right? So I think it's probably less stressful, right? But then sometimes people say, well, you know what, the proctor was a little stressful for me. I'd rather have the in-person proctor. So, you kind of got to think like, which is better for you, right? I think they're both great. And I'm so happy that, we have the online GMAT persisting and it looks like it's here to stay, right? I think it's a great option for people. Obviously makes the test more accessible and gives you a secondary option versus taking the test center. But you can kind of just think like, which do you like better? And in my calculus, there's no difference between the two, right? I think you're going to score pretty closely on one versus the other, right? Now, with that said, if you're a person who gets really nervous, like going into a test center, and you're like, wow, I'd be a lot more calm and relaxed if I could take it in my house, then, that is probably a pretty good rationale for, taking the home GMAT. All right, we've got about like 7 more minutes, Marty. Or Jeff, who's up next? Jeff, you going to do the next myth?
Yeah, just want to make sure there's no more questions here. Yeah, no more new questions. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a macro myth about not gaming the test. I mean, I think all of the myths we've discussed today are probably fall under the category of gaming the test. I mean, there's definitely strategy involved in taking the GMAT. There's strategies in guessing. There's strategies in eliminating answer choices. There's C traps and data sufficiency. There's E traps. All of those things come into play, but none of those strategies are going to be the game changer for you unless you have the skills necessary, the foundation necessary, the knowledge necessary. So you got to focus on really learning the content and understand that, like, strategy in itself sometimes is just a way of solving a particular question. I think we like to think that strategies have to be this wide-ranging macro thing that I'm doing on the test, and it's not really like that. I mean, if you know your stuff, then you can attack the questions properly, and there's really nothing to game. People can sit around and tinker with the algorithm all day long and mess around with the practice exams and say, well, this worked or that worked. I mean, it's kind of like, someone coming to you and saying, well, I have this, this stock trading strategy that will work 100% of the time. And it's like, well, no, that's not accurate. And it's the same thing for the GMAT. And just being great is what's going to get you through the test. And then once you get to that level of greatness, then start thinking about true, real strategies, micro strategies that can help you with the exam, but not these far encompassing things that you read about. And you're like, well, I can get through this test in a month because I have these 10 tips or something like that.
Yeah, it's an amazing point, guys. Look, yeah, there are timing strategies, but I don't know if I call them a strategy. It's like, look, this is the time on the test. This is the number of questions you got. Okay, is it really a strategy to be like, okay, this is how I need to progress through the questions? No, it's almost just like a consequence of the time versus number of questions. The real strategies are at the question level, in my mind, ladies and gentlemen, right? Once you know the basics of the test, like, hey, for example, don't miss any questions at the end of the test. Don't randomly guess to catch up on time. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of structural things that we go over in the TTP course that will help you. But once you get above that basic foundation, yeah, let's say that's worth, I don't know, I'm making it up. Let's say all that basic stuff is worth 50 points or something, right? Just making that number up. Once you get above that low-hanging fruit, the real strategies are at the question level, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you're talking about reading comp, sentence correction, CR, data sufficiency, problem solving, the real strategies are at the question level. Oh, all right. I just saw 200 questions like this where, where Money Trail was choosing, 3 vegetables from 7 vegetables, 3 sparkling waters from 8 sparkling waters, and, whatever, 5 vegan desserts from, 10 vegan desserts. How many different meals can he make? Well, you're like, man, I know how to do this. I've learned the fundamental counting principle, whatever, I know how to do this. I've seen this before. That's the strategy. Or boom, you get this really gnarly question that's on verb tense mood. And like, geez, I've seen 200 of these verb tense mood questions before. I haven't seen this one. And this one looks pretty tough, but I know the triggers to look for, right? I know what to look for to cross off wrong answers because I've been trained about how to think about verb tense mood questions, right? Or on cause and effect CR, boom. I see a cause and effect CR, boom, right away I'm thinking about, cause and effect might be there, might not be there, might just be correlation, reversal of cause and effect, right? A third factor in there, right? You're like, boom, I've seen this before. I know the strategies about how to answer this specific type of critical reasoning, weaken or strengthen cause and effect question. That's the real strategies, ladies and gentlemen. So that's a great point that Jeff and Marty brought up, is that, look, you want to be focused strategy on the question level to the greatest degree possible, not on the macro level, right? Marty, I don't know if you had something you want to say about that.
I totally agree. I think that's where it's at. If you're good at answering the questions, the test is really a matter of how many questions can I get correct. That's what you're focused on, and you're focused on that while you're taking the test. How many questions can I get correct? And the way you're going to get more questions correct is being better at more kinds of questions, And someone's saying, well, how can I improve speed? Same thing. The better you are at getting more questions correct, the faster you're going to go. It's very simple. There's I have a blog post out there on how to improve speed in verbal, and we have one on how to improve speed in quant. But what it really comes down to is the better you are at answering the questions, the faster you're going to go, and the more you're going to get correct. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah, someone just asked probably like my favorite question, Hungry Boy. You know what? Maybe if we just get a couple minutes, I want to just quickly address this. This is like a PhD thesis. But so he says, why does sometimes intuition, I think he's saying, attack logic when picking the answer choices? And this is like really helpful if you think about it. The human brain, the intuition of the human brain doesn't work very well. And this is like, if you look at the research of like Daniel Kahneman, like thinking fast and slow, and like type 1 versus type 2 reasoning and decision sciences. Usually our first response that comes online is not a deep critical analysis. This is humans in general. The brain wants to conserve energy. It's lazy. It wants to find the fastest way from A to Z. And this worked great in human evolution. Tiger, yes, run. Lion, climb the tree. We didn't need to analyze option model price. We didn't have Black-Scholes option pricing, right? We didn't have permutations and combinations. We had them, but we just never really thought about them. We didn't have the GMAT. So in a test like the GMAT, you have to bring on your more sophisticated critical thinking skills and override that knee-jerk reaction, right? So for example, a great example of this is when you answer A is the correct answer in a data sufficiency, like statement 1 alone is correct, sufficient to answer the question, but you pick C or something, right? That's because your initial knee-jerk reaction was not a deep enough, sort of logical enough approach to the question, right? So that's one thing that TTP, Target Test Prep GMAT course, really helps you with, is taking offline these knee-jerk reactions that they make you get questions wrong, and instead learning the deeper logical structures that will help you to get these right. And this goes into like not using your ear in sentence correction. You've heard us say that a lot, right? Because in using your ear, you're almost always, I don't care how good of a speaker of English you are, I guarantee you're making hundreds of grammatical, logical fallacies every day in your speech. I am, Marty is, Jeff is, because we speak to communicate. I mean, and we try and be as logical and organized as possible, but we say a lot of things that would never pass the writing sniff test, okay? So like when you use your ear, you're pretty much using your intuition in sentence correction, which doesn't work, right? Because those curveballs go by you, because we're used to giving people flexibility in communication. We're used to giving them leeway. We're used to reading between the lines. 80% of communication is nonverbal, right? So we're not that good at actually listening and thinking. So yeah, you got to use logic. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about a minute over, so I appreciate that. Once again, hopefully this little webinar series was helpful for you on debunking myths on the GMAT. Scott from Target Test Prep, Marty from Target Test Prep, Jess from Target Test Prep. We'd be more than happy to help any of you guys. If anything you need, just get in touch with us. We'd be more than happy to help plan a course of action for you, answer more of your questions. We're available omni-channel, guys. Pretty much nowhere you can't find us on the internet talking about the GMAT GRE. So I'm sure you could find us if you need. But hope you all happy New Year to everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful 2023, full of health, happiness, success, friendship, love, prosperity, all the good things in life, and especially high GMAT scores. Wish you all the best, guys. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
Good to see you, everybody.
Okay.